I've been tired maybe being dust. But after only 2-3 days, what can you expect? I wasn't used to being dust, and he goes and makes me into man. You can see right away from the expression on my face, I didn't like it. So he's going to butter me up. He puts me in this garden. And I don't butter. I don't butter. He brings me all the animals. I should give them names. What do I know names? Call it something, he says. Anything you want. So I make names up. Lion, tiger, elephant, giraffe. Crazy, but that's what he wants. I'm naming animals since 5 a.m. Every evening I'm tired. I go to bed early. In the morning I wake up, and there she is sitting by a pool of water, admiring herself. "Hello, Adam," she says. "I'm your mate, I'm Eve." "Pleased to meet you," I tell her, and we shake hands. Actually, I'm not pleased. From time immemorial, nothing. Now, rush, rush, rush. 2 days ago I'm dust. Yesterday all day I'm naming animals. Today I got a mate already. Also, I didn't like the way she looked at me. At herself in the mirror. In the water. Well, you know what happened. I don't have to tell you. There were all those fruit trees. She took a bite. I took a bite. The snake took a bite. It looked like a flash out of the garden. No, I'm not complaining. I'm not complaining. After all, it's his garden. And you don't want nobody eating his apples, it's suspicious. What irritates me is the nerve of the guy. I didn't ask him to make me even dust. He could have left me nothing, like I was before. Such a fuss. One lousy little apple. Not even ripe. There wasn't much time from creation. It was still spring. I didn't ask for Cain. I didn't ask for Abel. I didn't ask for nothing. If anything goes wrong, who's to blame? Sodom, Gomorrah, Babel, Ararat, me or my kids catch it. Fire, flood, pillar of salt. Be patient, he said. You won't understand me. Look, he made it. It was his idea. It breaks down, so we'll fix it. But I told him one day, you're in too much of a hurry. In 6 days, you make everything there is. You expect it to run smoothly. Something's always going to happen. You have thought first, conceived a plan, consulted a specialist. You wouldn't have so much trouble all the time. You can't tell him nothing, he knows it all. Like I say, he means well, but he's a meddler, and he's careless. He could have made that woman so she wouldn't bite no apple. All right, okay. So what's done is done. But all the same, you should have known better. Or at least, you could have blown on other dust. Well, that's the closing of the service? No. So, I'm an infrequent speaker from this pulpit, so I get a little confused. It's nice to be here today. My daughter Susan stood up and introduced herself. Our son Bruce is also down here in the front row. Susan's mother-in-law is also sitting down here in the front row. Jan Jensen. I'm happy to have her here. I have a niece, a granddaughter, I should say, in the front row. Her name is Kate. She had a grandfather whose name was Harvey Henshaw. So some of you, certainly John, will remember Harvey Henshaw. I have a grandson here whose name is Nate, with his wife Polly, and with Polly's mother from Baltimore, Redscape. Nate, I said Nate, yes. Yeah, that's it. Okay. ago, my favorite political conservative, David Brooks, had an op-ed page in the New York Times. This was in February. The gist of which was, in his first sentence, there is a strong vein of hostility against Orthodox religious believers in America today, especially among the young. He went on to write that when secular people, or mostly secular people such as we might be, are asked by researchers to give their impression of a devoutly faithful, whether Jewish or Christian or Muslim or other, the words that come up commonly include judgmental, hypocritical, old-fashioned, out of touch. And at first blush, that seemed like an okay list to me. But I added irrational and anti-science. But on reflection, that did not seem to me to be an accurate representation of the more conservative religious faith I have known, and with members of my family, especially. I think David Brooks is wrong in his opening thought. There's little hostility against Orthodox religious belief in the United States today, I think. But there's surely hostility against right-wing, Bible-spouting religious zealots among us. How could it be otherwise? It seems to me that Brooks had it turned around. The hostility I see, and ultimately fear, is the hostility of the narrow fundamentalisms that scoff at science, oppose the separation of church and state, who imagine that God has a strong need to be loved and obeyed, and if not, will be a punishing God. A recent poll by the Pew Research Center reports that a writer says, writing about the poll, is embarrassing and sad. Because, he says, the percentage gap between Democrats and Republicans on the issue of evolution has widened in recent years. It was a gap of only 10% a few years ago. But this year's poll, probably last year's poll, amounted to 24%, with Republicans believers in evolution at 43%, and Democrats at 67%. 43%. Politics aside, white mainline Protestants, Methodists, Episcopalians, Presbyterians, United Church of Christ, and those who are unaffiliated too, make up about 78% believers in evolution, while white Catholics were a bit lower, but white evangelical Protestants were 27%. In his article, Brooks went on to praise the beautiful experience of the religious experience of the faithful, the comforts of deep faith. And he does this implying that the more liberal and secular among us are living empty, barren, meaningless existences. And he quotes a passage from Augustine about how much Augustine loved his God. But Brooks should know that those of us without that deep faith in a watchful God are not without deep feelings about the wonders of life. We can see beauty in the everyday. We favor facts over superstition, skepticism over cosmic certainty. We seek to live full and meaningful lives. Who among us can view the long road evolution has taken to bring us here without a full sense of wonder? Who among us does not, on occasion, have a sense of awe, akin to that perhaps displayed for us on Sunday nights these days, as Neil deGrasse Tyson invites us into his cosmos? And who is not moved, really, by Darwin's words, there is a grandeur in this view of life? There is no doubt a strong mood among us that those religious folks of the far right, including some political women and men, would be immeasurably happy if they could control our society as religion once controlled us and people in the Dark Ages. Who needs science? Well, we have the book of Genesis, they would say. For hundreds of years, European minds were locked in orthodoxy, save for scattered rebellions against the Catholic Church and the emperors and kings it anointed. Most Europeans had no prospects other than life after life in heaven, promised to true believers. So, to be sure, Martin Luther helped us to overcome and overthrow a particular kind of orthodoxy. But let us not imagine he was some sort of a 16th century liberal. Luther's defense of the priesthood of all believers was a step up, to be sure. He had taken on the papacy for the sake of freedom of conscience, but in truth, he was not really a believer in freedom of conscience. He may have had arguments with the Pope, but he also said, reason is the greatest enemy faith has. She is the devil's greatest whore, a whore eaten by scab and leprosy. Throw dung in her face, drown her in baptism. Well, those are Luther's lines you don't hear very often in Lutheran churches these days. To be sure, we all have our ancestors. Luther opposed the papacy but helped establish a new authority, the Bible. It was the final authority in all matters. Christian orthodoxy today is Bible-centered, as we know. And it is that faith that feels it is being abused by the secular world. Remember the so-called war on Christmas that is waged every Christmas time, which many religious conservatives have been fighting regularly, charging that the use of the phrase "happy holidays" is anti-Christian, and have even required that businesses with that sort of sign remove the sign or be boycotted. In fact, despite David Brooks, it is a biblical fundamentalism that is trying to control us every day. It is not religious belief that differs from our own that we have trouble with. It is what the belief causes people to do. Denial of civil rights, bombing of abortion clinics, eliminating accurate science in public schools, and in other religious bodies, perhaps suicide bombings, honor killings, and found everywhere. The belief that God supports what their own religious faith proclaims. Alfred North Whitehead's lines have stuck with me for as long as I have lived almost. In the year 1500, he wrote, Europe knew less than Archimedes, who died in the year 212 BC. If indeed knew less, and I can probably maybe accept his thesis, it was because of the centrality of religious belief. A belief in a holy book, and a belief in an overpowering deity that is both a creator but also a destroyer. Whitehead's line does not relate to religion of the modern age at all. But when I hear fundamentalists scoffing at climate change and teaching their children about Noah's flood as if it really happened that way, I realize that there is almost an honorable place for ignorance in their perspective of the world. Perhaps this, indeed it does, bring us to God. God is everywhere, apparently. At least God is in the pages of the New York Times. Here are a couple of examples from the February 11th issue. The first appears in a story headlined, British politicians blame one another for regional flooding. One of the leaders of something called the United Kingdom Independence Party, David Sylvester, said that the floods that ravaged parts of southern England in midwinter were the fault of the Prime Minister, David Cameron, because, and I quote exactly, by legalizing same-sex marriage, he had brought the wrath of God onto his country. Well, that's better than even Pat Robertson could do. There's nothing to comment about that. There's a second story in that issue of the New York Times. The headline read, "Suicide bomb trainer in Iraq accidentally blows up his class." The story is about the death of 21 would-be suicide bombers. Among the delighted Iraqis laughing at the error, one was more serious and was reported by the paper as saying, "This is God showing justice. This is God sending a message to the bad people and the criminals in the world." The God of traditional religion, Judaism, Islam, Christianity, is no prize. We would not want such a deity as our neighbor or our president. There's a new movie out called Noah that apparently follows the original legend about the destruction of the world by God, a deed that would be actionable in any court of law today. Is that God moral? Destroy all those women and men and children? Was it worth worshiping? Sort of frightening. Long ago, I decided that the legends about the gods were no closer to truth than the Santa Claus legend itself. Perhaps. Is belief in God a source of comfort or solace for some? Of course it is. Although I would say that all the sources of comfort which are believed to come from God come not from God, but from the thought of God, which is a creation of the human mind. But that belief is important for many people, and my own skepticism about such matters is usually rather subdued. Number 3. It seems strange to me that right-wing Christians should imagine that they are under attack. We are being drowned in God language. We have God on our money. We have God in our Pledge of Allegiance. We have God in the Congress, and no political figure dares end a major speech without adding, "God bless the United States of America." Well, I should insert here, if I can remember it right. Bob Kerrey, who was for 2 terms our governor, 2 terms our United States Senator, never used that phrase at the end of the speech of his, and was asked by a reporter why he never did. And Kerry, who called himself to the reporter, but never when he was running for office, and agnostic, Kerry said, "It seemed to me that it's bringing religion into the political world and it doesn't belong here." Well, 2 years ago, the House of Representatives voted 396 to 9 in favor of the resolution affirming in God we trust as our national motto. It's kind of amazing. No, what I mean is, what's amazing is that 9 people voted against it. I have a vague memory of a comedy scene some decades ago that imagined people from out of space landing on our continents which have been demolished totally. There's a long, in the future, group of researchers wondering who lived on this continent. And one of them coming across a coin, and he said, "They must have been a very religious people who lived here. For this coin seems to say, 'In God we trust.'" And then he looked again and said, "Well, trust it." So when it comes to God, I remain a skeptic. And I feel very secure in that position. A week ago in the sermon here, our minister Fritz Hudson quoted from one of my earliest sermons, in which I said, "Religion creates a community of like-minded folk who care for one another and who help one another deal with the large questions of life and death. It gives people a place to view the world, and we all need that." So let me close. It's all right to close the sermon a little briefly. Some sermons a little shorter. No problem. Let me close with some God talk. We reject dogma, and in so doing we're making a statement about religious knowledge. It is limited. In rejecting dogma, we're saying that some things are beyond our knowing. There is a necessary mystery to existence. And one way we respond to that mystery is to be filled with wonder and to live happily with our human limitations. A colleague, the late Forrester Church, called it the poetry of God. And another colleague, John Haynes Holmes, once wrote, "When I say God, it is poetry, not theology. Nothing any theologian ever wrote about God has helped me much, but everything the poets have written about flowers and birds and skies and seas and the saviors of the race and God has at one time or another reached my soul. The theologians gather dust upon the shelves of my library, but the poets are stained with my fingers and blotted with my tears." And the philosopher Santayana said something similar. "My atheism," he said, "is like that of Spinoza, is true piety toward the universe and denies only gods fashioned by men in their own image to be servants of their own interests." Or, to end with some favorite lines from Forrester Church, who knew the difference between literalism and poetry. He wrote, "Even if God does not exist, we are here by the grace of God." Amen. Our hymn is number 355.